This video is going to talk us through methods in context. So this question appears on paper 1, which is your education theories and methods paper. And it's question 5. It's worth 20 marks. The methods in context question is very different to all the other questions you get on across all of the 3 papers in sociology. It's different in terms of it's looking for a different set of skills, and it's also different in terms of you don't need things like key thinkers for this. The best way to get good at these questions is to just keep having a go at them and repeatedly doing them in time conditions. These questions are really important because they are usually a differentiator between those top mark bands. But hopefully by the end of this video, you'll be an expert in answering them. So the questions tend to look like this. We've got apply material from item C in your own knowledge of research methods. Evaluate the strengths and limitations of using a method to investigate a part of education. Now, the method will be where you use your knowledge from your research method module, and the part of education will be where you will use your knowledge from what you've learned in education. So this question has got an item, and you'll be expected to use that throughout, but we'll have a look at a question shortly, and I'll show you just how to use it. There's 2 parts to answering this question then. You've got your method. So this is, again, where you'll use your research method knowledge. And you've also got the context. So we're talking about who we are researching and what topic we are researching. The how will have its own issues. So we're thinking about that research method that it's suggesting that the research is using. So you've got your practical, ethical and theoretical issues. You are welcome to pause this and jot down any of these if you feel the need to. There are some of these that are very specific to education. So, for example, your practical ones, accessing participants in an educational setting can be quite difficult. You'll usually need to access a gatekeeper, so someone such as a head teacher. There's also ethical issues as well, and that can be linked to vulnerable groups. For example, pupils tend to be under the age of 18, which makes them vulnerable. And theoretical ones as well, so it's that are the participants understanding? Are they being truthful and those kind of things? But we'll have a look at that in a little bit more detail shortly. Students tend to make a common mistake with this question, and they focus only on the strengths and limitations of the research method. So they'll consider those practical, ethical and theoretical considerations of the method, but they don't really do anything else with it. So to achieving this question, you need to talk about the part of education that's been identified in the question and the specific participants of the research. And that's where I pull it through into this who and what. So who we are researching and what topic are we investigating. The who can be categorised into different people. So if you're thinking about educational research, you are likely to come into contact with pupils, parents, teachers, and also educational settings. So you may not actually speak to or come into contact with pupils, parents, or teachers, but you'll just observe classrooms as such, and they'll come with their own issues that we can use as answers in our methods in context question. So we're going to start off by looking at pupils. Pupils have got their own identities. And you've looked a lot into pupil identity throughout your education module, and you'll know certain things about specific students, i.e. in terms of their social class, gender and ethnicity. So, for example, you know that working class kids don't do as well as middle class kids in education, and there's multiple arguments for that. You get to use that knowledge to support your answer in methods in context. There's also the side of things that talk about how pupils are a vulnerable group. So that's going to raise issues in terms of consent. You might get consent from parents, and that comes into its own difficulties. There's also issues around pupils' ability to understand what the research is asking of them, really. So, for example, we've got a questionnaire. Do those pupils fully understand what those questions are asking them? And again, access. So you might need to get in touch with the gatekeeper. And sometimes head teachers can be a little bit reluctant to let sociologists into their schools because they're worried about being exposed. So these are issues around pupils. Parents come with their own issues too. So again, you've got those things that you know around about parents, what you learn in social class and ethnicity, and also a little bit in gender as well. So when we think about things like parental support, so different social classes will experience parental support differently in the same sense that different ethnic groups may experience parental support differently. The other part of it as well is access. So it's very unlikely as a researcher you're going to get access to the telephone numbers of parents or the addresses of parents because schools have to stick to their GDPR guidelines. If you are going to take an approach where you put letters out that students take home, the likelihood of getting all parents responding is very, very slim. And again, if we're linking that back to the identity, We know that middle class parents, for example, are more likely to be engaged in their children's education. So you're more likely to get a response rate from them, and that might impact your data too. The other part of it then is teachers. And I said this earlier on, teachers are vulnerable as well. They work long hours. This may cause issues if you're using a research method that is quite time costly. We've also got the professional status, so they may be reluctant to disclose anything that may look like they aren't doing their job properly. They may be worried about losing their job. They've also got a duty of care, so they will find it difficult to discuss specific students. There's also that side of things where it comes to impression management. So teachers as professionals will be very conscious of what the research is thinking of them and also what the school is thinking of them. And the last one's educational settings. So schools are a very controlled environment. Everything is scheduled time-wise, so you know when your lessons start, you know when they end, you know when your breaks are, you know when your lunch is. The way that the school moves, so the way you move between classrooms is already set out. So that makes it quite difficult for us as researchers to get in and build a rapport with participants. The other side of things as well is access. So you'll need a gatekeeper to get into the educational institution. But if you're going to go into a classroom as well, you need access from the gatekeeper to get into that. So I don't know if you've ever been in a classroom setting where you've had a surprise observation, for example, and your teacher gets a bit uptight about it. If you're conducting research, you need to have the okay to let them in. Although sometimes head teachers do override that okay from teachers. But again, this gives us some things that we can talk about in our answer. The other part of the context then is the what, and this tends to link to a topic in education that you've covered in the educational model. So these ones are examples from previous papers. So the influence of family and education. So like I said before, you can link that back to what you've learned in social class and ethnicity. Teachers labelling pupils. Again, there's some social class, gender, ethnicity in there. Also your interactionism. Pupil exclusions, pupil behaviour, subject choice, and pressure on students to achieve high grades are all examples of topics. And you'll be able to talk specifically about why certain participants may feel uncomfortable about talking about those issues, or why there may be some issues in terms of validity and truthfulness and all those kind of things. So we're going to look at a question together. This question is about applying material from the item and your own knowledge of research methods. Evaluate strengths and limitations of using unstructured interviews to investigate streaming. So we can already see there that we're pulling out how we are doing it, which is unstructured interviews, and what topic we're going to look at, which is streaming. Let's have a look at the item and see if we can figure out who is going to be part of our research. So you can pause this to have a little read now, see if you can spot it for yourself. So we can see we've got teachers and we've got pupils. So we know that our who in our context is teachers and pupils, and our what in our context is streaming. And the method we're going to use is unstructured interviews. So we need to figure out what issues and strengths there are using unstructured interviews, specifically to look at streaming when talking to teachers and pupils. Sometimes it's a little bit easy to pick one or the other in terms of the who to make your answers a bit better. So I'm going to use teachers for mine. Let's go back to that item and see if there's any hooks we can fish out that we can use to support our answers. The item's really useful for these kind of things. It's got some little juicy details that we can use to support our answers. So streaming involves teachers differentiating between pupils on the basis of their perceived ability. So that's already hinting that perceived ability that there might be some issues there. This may result in working class pupils and those from certain ethnic minorities being placed in lower streams. So we can link that to our who. Lower stream pupils may lose self-esteem, give up trying, and even join anti-school subcultures. And again, that can link to our who and our what. These pupils are less likely to take part in research if it's a voluntary sample because they've got anti-school subculture. But in contrast, we've got our pupils who identify strongly with school's values and goals, i.e. our pro-school subcultures. You know what they're like. You've seen a pro-school subculture kid in your school before where they really want to support the teacher and they're happy to engage in anything to do with education. So you might see them in your research, which might affect the data that you are collecting. So we've got unstructured interviews are often effective at exploring interviewees' personal feelings about sensitive topics. So we've got a little bit of a strength coming through there. Being able to build that rapport and have that time might make teachers or pupils a little bit more comfortable in discussing these issues and this topic. And some pupils and teachers may refuse to participate in an unstructured interview. And again, that links back to our who. So when we're talking about how some teachers may feel a little bit reluctant when it comes to disclosing information about how they stream students, it's a little bit worried about getting exposed to some bias. We're going to have a look into how we would write this. So I'm going to give you a couple of examples. We're going to start off with the ones that don't quite hit the mark. I'll talk you through why they don't quite hit the mark, and we'll end with a model answer. Before we do that, we'll have a look at the time that we spend on this question and the structure we're going to use. So you should be spending about 30 minutes on this question unless you get extra time. You're aiming for 3 or 4 paragraphs and a conclusion. The conclusion is really important. You'll not get into that top mark band without it. There's an item for this question, so you should be using a direct quote from the item in your answer. Now, it doesn't have to be in every single paragraph, but if we're aiming for 3 or 4, I want to see it in at least 2 of them. So your structure's as follows. You've got your point. Your point can either be a practical, ethical, or theoretical strength or weakness. So just one of those. In your main body part of your paragraph, rather than having our evidence and explain, we're going to go for the who, how, and what part of it. So this is where you're linking your method to your context. Then you're going to link that back to your question to show that you are answering that question, and then you're going to evaluate it because this is a 20-mark evaluate question. Now, it might not make sense to you right now, but we're going to have a look at it, and I'm going to show you the structure and how it works. So we're starting off with our first example. So you can pause this to have a little read. But you can see from this one, we've got this point, we've got a little bit of a conversation about the method, so the how. There isn't really any mention of who. So they've dropped in that they've spoke about teachers being kept anonymous, but they've not specifically said why that's important. We've got our link sentence, we've got a little bit of evaluation. So this one's not the best in terms of how to answer it. It'd probably sit in that bottom 2 mark, and I would say bottom 1, bottom 2. So our next example is a little bit better, so you can pause this to have a read again. And again, you can see in this one, we've got our point, we've got a little bit on the issues around that method. We've got a little bit about the who here. So we've mentioned teachers, but we've also spoke about how they've got professional status. They might fear criticism or repercussions if they express the views that could be perceived as discriminatory or unprofessional. So we've developed a little bit of the context there. This shows using unstructured interviews for researching, streaming poses ethical issues for teachers. So again, we linked it back to that question. We've got a little bit more of a developed evaluation here as well. So we spoke about how actually there might be an ethical issue around privacy and confidentiality and those kind of things. But if we are building that rapport, we can explain to the participants that actually we're going to do everything we can to protect them. This one's an okay answer. Because there's some reference to education there, but it hasn't actually spoken about the specific topic we are looking into. So this would sit in the middle mark bandish. If you've got all your paragraphs to this standard, you've spoke about education in general. So you're looking at 13 to 16 mark. But again, we can do better than that. So we're going to have a look at our third example. So again, you can pause to read, have a little read of it, see if you can see the structure coming through, see if you can see where we've actually made those links to that context, and see if you can spot the item in there as well. Okay, I'm going to talk you through the structure then. So in green, we've got our point. So you can see there that I've identified that there's an issue of privacy and confidentiality. Teachers, there's a little bit of a hint in the how there. So we've got a little bit of the how coming through. So you can see in our image, we've spoke about the issue with that research method is privacy and confidentiality, and those concerns around confidentiality. So we've ticked off our who. Sorry, our how. Now we're going on to our who. So we spoke about teachers who have got professional status. And we talk about how streaming is decided by teachers, and so they might fear the criticisms or repercussions if they express the views that could be perceived as discriminatory or unprofessional. So we're talking about why it's an issue for participants that we are using. And this one's gone a little bit further because it spoke about the what. So we've thrown the item in here because the item gave us that nice little juicy bit of the what. So streaming involves teachers differentiating between pupils on the basis of their perceived ability. And I've pulled that directly from the item. As teachers are doing this, and from what we know from education in terms of social class and ethnicity, we know that teachers may label and set and stream students differently based on their class or ethnicity. So we've got here, it could be discriminatory or unprofessional. For example, they may worry about being accused of bias against working class or ethnic minority children who are more likely to be in lower sex streams. So I've talked about the topic. I've also mentioned a bit of the who in there, but you can see that we've got a full picture of the context. So we're worried about how the teachers may interact with this research because the topic itself is very sensitive. And we've stated exactly why. We've got our linking sentence again. We've got our evaluation. So the evaluation is saying that yes, these issues exist, but unstructured interviews are really, really good for this situation because the researcher can build a rapport with the participants and they can reassure that confidentiality is going to be there and that the participation is really important. And that can lead to teachers feeling a little bit more comfortable and they may talk in a little bit more detail and that might increase your validity a little bit. So that there is the model answer. We've got all of the context in there. We spoke about the participants, we spoke about the method. We've also got that evaluation in there, and we've also got how in there. If you get all of your paragraphs to this standard, you can get pushed up into that top mark band, but not without your conclusion. Students often ask me how to do a conclusion in these ones, so I thought it'd be best to go through that as well. So your conclusion in this one is very similar to your conclusion in your other 20 markers and your 30 markers. You need to make a judgment. So in this situation, if we go back to the question is asking us to evaluate if unstructured interviews are the best way to research streaming when speaking to teachers and pupils. So you need to make a decision. It either is or it isn't. Don't say it could be or it couldn't be. We don't want a however in our conclusions. It either is the best way to do it or it's not. And then you need to justify why you've made that judgment. So if you've gone, yes, it is the best way, you need to say why the argument's stronger. And if not, then you need to explain why you've made that judgment again. If you've gone down the no route, that unstructured interviews are not the best way to research streaming when speaking to teachers and pupils, and you've explained why, you could offer other options. So, for example, it might be better to look at secondary data and look at pupils' profiles in those classrooms to see if there's any trends or patterns in streaming, social class and ethnicity, and see if you can pull out any information behind that. And that could be a better way because you aren't upsetting teachers, you aren't making them feel uncomfortable and you're getting on those ethical issues. But I'm not saying it's the best way because there's no such thing as the best way to do a piece of research. It's all just about justifying why you picked that method for that topic and those pupils. But yeah, in a nutshell, that's your methods in context question. 3 or 4 paragraphs and a conclusion. If I was writing an answer to this question, I would go for a practical paragraph, an ethical paragraph, and a theoretical paragraph. So I've done an ethical one. I'd follow up with a practical and I'd follow up with a theoretical and then throw in my conclusion. If you want to have a go at this question, you are more than welcome to. If you've got any questions on the question, chuck them in comments. And if you've got any other topics in sociology you want me to have a look at, feel free to chuck them into the comments too. Thank you.